Football is known as the beautiful game, and we all know it's a game of two halves. This YouTube channel is a channel of two halves. On one hand, we talk about the beautiful game, and on the other hand, we talk about some topics that can only be described as ugly. But while they're ugly, these topics are going to be important, inspiring, and informative. So welcome to Matters That Matter. How's it going, everyone? Firstly, thank you so much for clicking on this video and giving it a watch, because as you would have known, in my intro to the channel, in that video, I did say not only are we going to talk about football and do brilliant football content, but we're going to talk about things that matter a bit more than football. So today, I'm really happy to say I'm joined by Gulwali Passarley. I hope I pronounced your name perfectly there. And the topic of today's conversation is Afghanistan. The reason why you're here today is because I don't think there's probably many people that I know that are better qualified, more experienced, personally and sort of academically in terms of speaking about the issue. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your history going back to your days in Afghanistan and how you find yourself in the UK today. And after that, we'll get into the depths of the conversation. But first, I want to know more about you.
Thanks, brother. That's quite philosophical. So yes, I was born in Afghanistan many years ago. I grew up living in the mountains as a shepherd with my grandparents. We had a very nomadic life. Life was really beautiful. Although my father was a doctor, my mother was a midwife. I didn't spend much time with my parents, but I spent a lot of time with my grandparents from age 3, 4 till age 7. And sadly, the war happened in 2001, which changed my life and the lives of my family and millions of Afghans. After a few years, we were forced to flee, me and my brother. I was age 12, my brother was about 13, 14, and we had to travel across half of the world to get to the UK. It was a long and complicated journey. It was about 12,000 miles. Took me a year at the age of 12. Me and my brother were separated by the smugglers. So I saw a lot of humanity and inhumanity of people, cruelty as well as kindness. Yeah, it was a hellish experience. I was in prison in almost every country I went through: Iran, Turkey, Bulgaria, Greece, Italy, France, and there was a lot of back and forth. The reason it took me so long was because I was kept getting deported and was treated very badly by the authorities, and the smuggler treated us as a commodity. And sadly, I wasn't, being separated from my brother. I had to travel on my own, but I found other amazing travel companions and friends who helped me, took me as a little brother and a friend, and pushed me physically and mentally to continue on this very tough and challenging journey. My intention wasn't to come to the UK. I would have gone anywhere where they have welcomed me. That's one thing people kind of sometimes miss, that, was I coming to the UK to take all the jobs and money? Yeah. That wasn't the point. I would have gone anywhere if they have accepted me, except on the journey. Italy was the only place which treated me with kindness and compassion and care. But by then I knew my brother was in the UK, so I continued to get to England to find him. So you left Afghanistan when you were 12, just you and your brother. What made you do that? How did you decide to do that? What was your last day in Afghanistan like when you knew you were going to do that journey tomorrow, those moments with your family? I can't even imagine. I've got a nephew who's 12. I can't imagine him doing that at that age. I remember at the age of 12, I was literally managing our family, me and my brother, because my uncles were in prison. I had loved ones being killed by the US forces. So we were not just any kids. I have a niece now. She's 12, and she can't even bring water for herself. But we grew up in a very different environment, and we left. It wasn't a decision that I made. It was a decision made by my family, particularly my grandmother, who wanted us to be safe and send us for our own safety, and my mother. And I say, I've written a book about it, The Lightless Sky, and I say that my mother saved us, but she also lost us. I have not seen her for the last 15 years, and I very much miss her. So yeah, the last days in Afghanistan, we didn't know the extent of the journey, the implication. I didn't really understood that it's going to take me so long, and I was resistant to the idea of leaving because I thought my job was to protect my family, and it was kind of not an honorable thing to do. I still feel guilty of leaving them in such a terrible state of affairs where they needed us. Yes, we were in a great danger. The Taliban wanted to recruit us to become fighters and potentially become suicide bombers, and the US government wanted to recruit us as an informants.
I just want to go back to you then at 12 years old, having to move away from your family. So your grandmother, your mother, they decided that actually it's better and safer for you. You're going to have a better life for you to go off on your own accord. I mean, that must have been heartbreaking and so difficult for them. So in the minds of your family and yourself, who were you fleeing from?
This is a really good question. So, I tell people that, trying to explain to them that you had to be faced with extraordinary circumstances for your loved ones, for your family, to send you away, to remove you from their love and from their nurturing environment. So this was the most loving thing they could have done for us. At the time, I was very angry about it. I was not happy that this was happening, but I knew the implication and the severity of the problem. We were fleeing not only from the Taliban, because a lot of the time the media just makes it as though we were fleeing from the Taliban. That was true, but it was most also the Americans, or the people who work with the Americans. We were kind of between a hard place and a rock. So we left because of the war, ultimately, because of the conflict, mainly because of the US and because of the Taliban both. So it was not just one or the other. I wouldn't have left if 9/11 did not happen. I wouldn't have left if the US did not invade Afghanistan. I wouldn't have left if they have not killed my loved ones and my family members. I mean, it was just a situation where we were pawned in a great game between these powers and these groups.
It sounds like a lot for an adult, never mind a 12-year-old, because I know that you're saying that you were quite wise to the world as 12-year-olds, you were very hands-on and doing different things, but I guess mentally, politically, digesting all of this must have been really, really confusing for you. So
it was indeed, but I didn't have time to digest, I didn't have time to reflect. Things was happening so fast, I had to focus not on myself but on my family. I remember I used to try to support our family, because it was a difficult situation financially, economically, socially, politically. We were being, we were orphans, and we had to somehow manage it. And we did. We didn't care about our well-being, our mental health. Me and my brother, we just had to grow up and be adults and be men. That's what we were told as children, man up. And all the experiences from my grandparents and experiences from my father in their work has made us to do the things that we didn't imagine we were capable of doing.
That must have been so tough. So two things I just want to focus on before we move into the current day in Afghanistan and what's going on right now and how we can do something to help. The first thing I want to ask you then, you didn't have time to reflect when you were 12 years old. That's understandable with everything that would have been going on. It's something that I can't relate to. I doubt many people watching this can relate to. You must have had time for reflection now. How do you view the Taliban now? How do you view the US forces and the job that they have or potentially have not done?
I think when I was young, I kind of supported their stand and fighting against the occupations. We Afghans growing up through our education system, through our families, we've always been taught Afghanistan was free. We fought against the British in the 1800s, 3 wars, we fought against them. We fought against the Soviet Union for 8 years, where 1 million Afghans lost their lives, and then we were fighting against the Americans. We didn't want invaders and occupiers. But my view of the Taliban has changed since coming to the UK and being educated more and being aware. I mean, the Taliban are taking the country really backwards in their ideology, especially in the last 20 years, the insecurity and the instability. We lost about 150,000 civilians. We lost 6,000 Afghan National Security Forces. These were Afghans. They were Muslims. So the Taliban ideology of suicide bombing and killing of innocents is to be condemned and to be spoken against. But at the same time, the Taliban it's not black and white. Things are more complicated. My family used to say, particularly my father and grandfather used to say, the Taliban came to power in 1994 when I was actually, kind of born. They came to power because there was a civil war in Afghanistan. The warlords were fighting amongst themselves. After the Soviet Union, the Russian has left, and people were happy. People were willing to give their freedom in return for security, because there was so much lawlessness, and the warlords were just having their own kind of authorities everywhere, in every district, every province. There was no system in place. But later on, the Taliban become quite extreme and fundamentalist, and even now they're saying they have changed. But things on the ground suggest otherwise. This morning I was watching a video on the national TV of Afghanistan. They were showing their parades, suicide bombers, the things they use to blow people off, the equipments and stuff, which seems to suggest they haven't changed, and that's concerning. I mean, if they have changed, that's good. And they've allowed girls to go to school, women's rights and human rights. So, but Afghanistan is such a place that, Western democracy is quite tough for Western democracy to work in Afghanistan, because it's a very tribal society. As an Afghan, as a young person, I want democracy. I want people to have a say. I want us to have elections. I want us to have freedom. A lot of people were given the test of freedom and a lot of hope. Yes, we had a system which was corrupt. We had warlords and people who were empowered by the US who should not have been empowered. But at the same time, people had hopes things will get better. We had institutions, we had national security forces, but sadly now that's all gone.
So I think the word you mentioned, change, is really, really important, because the US went in 20 years ago because the Taliban were a huge threat. Now there's claims that the Taliban have changed. I, for one, am very, very cynical about that. Personally, do I believe it? No. But I guess my question to you then, if you found yourself as a 12-year-old in Afghanistan now, would your family, in your opinion, have made the same decision to say to you, the Taliban are back, now you go in search of a better life?
We see a lot of young people leaving. I saw images and videos in Kabul airport where mothers are giving up their little kids, literally saying, just take my kids. People are really afraid. People are very scared of the uncertainty of what's going to happen. A lot of people have experienced them. So for 12 years old, they might not have experienced Taliban rule, but from their parents, they will know that things were pretty bad, especially when it comes to opportunities and development and lack of freedom. And so there were a lot of restrictions. For many people, like ordinary Afghans who are farmers, who are like my grandparents or my parents who just wanted to get on with their lives, they were not impacted as such. But people who wanted to be politically involved, wanted to have a voice, were of course impacted. Right now, we've been seeing reports of executions of oppositions in Afghan security forces, people who've been surrendered to the Taliban. So as a 12-year-old, if I was in Afghanistan, my family will want me perhaps to leave for a better future, because there are no opportunities in Afghanistan, and I'll struggle to get an education and opportunities. But when I was living in 2006, things was a lot better than what it is right now. Right now, we are in a crisis, a humanitarian crisis, where we have 6 million displaced people, 1 million in the last 2 weeks alone. We have about 5 million refugees in Pakistan and in Iran, and there are millions of Afghans across the world as well. And the UN say about 6 million or 7 million people are in need of urgent basic supplies like shelter, food, and a necessity. About 18 million people, just before this happened, the Taliban took over, 18 million people who are in need of humanitarian assistance. So that's something that I'm really concerned about. And I think, that's more than just other side of the politics. But there are people who are suffering, people living in poverty. COVID-19 has made it a lot more harder for people, because a lot of Afghans are daily laborers, and so they can't provide for their families.
I guess it's interesting that you say that mothers today in Afghanistan are giving up their children, which must be so incredibly hard to do. I recently became a father about 6 months ago. The thought of giving up my child to someone else so he can go and have a better life is just a thought I can't comprehend.
It's for an unknown future. You can't even be sure. You're just gambling.
You're gambling, with your child. I can't imagine handing my child over from my hands to someone else. So I think anyone that is a parent, you probably can't understand it from a parent's point of view. You can only understand it as a parent.
Indeed.
Having that point of view is just shocking to me. And it will suggest that if people are doing that in the current day, that there isn't that change that some people are claiming. If the Taliban are claiming that there's that much change, clearly people in Afghanistan don't even believe that. You mentioned women's rights, and that's something I really want to focus on. And this isn't to say that I want to try and diminish the struggle and the things that the average Afghan, the wider Afghan population will go through. But I really fear for women under Taliban rule. And specifically, not just women, but also young girls. Young girls that have grown up with dreams, aspirations, hobbies, interests freely. And now, it must be so hard for them, a 12-year-old girl who likes football, for example, to mentally process why she can no longer play football, or a makeup artist, or a singer, or these girls that have never seen life under Taliban rule that are now being told, no, you can't do this. Act differently, walk differently, think differently, everything different. How do you feel about the reality that is faced by Afghans, and specifically women, and even more specifically young girls in Afghanistan today?
It is definitely heartbreaking. I saw a video of the BBC reporter in Kabul the other day. A little girl, 8 years old, standing outside the house, and the reporter asked how things have changed. She said, well, I'm not allowed to go outside to play. I don't know, I'm bored. I'm just sitting at home. She didn't understood what was happening. And so certainly a lot of Afghans, women, particularly girls, they were at universities, they had high hopes. The Taliban says they could continue, but it has to be segregated. They could have jobs, but it has to be with limitations, and they have to be under an Islamic law. The Islamic law is open to interpretation. Of course. So it's like the Sharia law idea is like just an Islamic jurisdiction, but it could be, you could translate and interpret it in different ways. So yes, I'm definitely concerned for all Afghans, but particularly for the 15, 16 million women. And maybe, Afghanistan is a very young country. A lot of, more than 60% of our population are youth, young people. And that's why you see so many of them are leaving. Most of the people you saw at Kabul airport evacuated were young journalists, academics, women rights activists, human rights activists, campaigners, advocates, people who work with the government, who works with foreign embassies, and there were a lot of women in these groups. And so yes, I hope they will have opportunities and chance and be treated with dignity and respect, because in the past the Taliban used to say that, oh, the environment was not safe for them to be out and we need to make things better. And even recently, they used the same language. The Taliban spokesperson said, yeah, we will allow women to do, to participate in public life, but at the moment it's not safe and our fighters are not used to it. And so it seems like from the statements, it's very much similar to what they were saying in 1996, which I've seen recently. There's videos been reappearing of Taliban spokespeople saying exactly similar things then. So I hope we can make them accountable somehow, so they stay true to their words and allow people to exercise their freedom.
How do we make them accountable? On one hand, in this country, because now I want to shift the focus of this conversation from not what's going on in Afghanistan to what's going on in this country and wherever people are watching. How do we react as individuals, and what pressure do we put on our politicians now? Do we want England as a country that I'm in, or whichever country people are in, to recognise Taliban as a government so you can bring them to the table, talk to them, influence them? Or do you want to not recognise them in order to not legitimise their rule? How do we do that? How do we play that macro level political?
It's a very difficult one. So there are Afghans who wants the government, the UK government, the Western government not to recognise the Taliban. There are others who want them to recognise it. I'm kind of in between. I want the Western government to recognise them based on conditionality and to make sure, because if you don't recognise them, it's the Afghan people who will suffer. As I was saying already, there are people, 18 to 20 million people in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. So I want the UK to recognise them based on the condition they will respect women's rights, human rights, allow safe passage for people who wants to leave, not oppress people, not go after political opponents, allowed protests, allowed people to disagree with them and criticize them because they're not used to these things. Of course, it's like we can't really pressure them because they want to be sovereign and independent and so on. That's why they've been fighting. Recently, there was a UN resolution condemning the Taliban and or asking them to give safe passage to people who needs to flee, who works with foreign forces or who are fearing for their lives. Russia and China abstain on that resolution. That's very concerning, because now it used to be the international community agreed, had consensus in Afghanistan. Now that's shifting for political reasons. So I hope all the international community, including China and Russia and Pakistan, who have a lot of influence on the Taliban, to use their leverages and making sure that the achievements of the last 20 years, particularly on media freedoms and women's rights and human rights and education, are continued. But the issue we see now as an Afghan, they've been behaving very differently in Kabul compared to other provinces. So the Taliban are not, it seems that they're unified, but they're not. They have different factions. They have extremists, they have moderates, they have liberals, and then these people who are speaking in Doha, they're saying the right thing, but the reality on the ground is very different. So we need to make sure. I want the international media and observers to be there. I want the UN to be there to report, to inform the public. I really want us not to forget about Afghanistan. Just to give you an example, the day Kabul fell, I did an Instagram video and it was seen by 40,000 people. And now when I share something, it's seen by less than 4,000 people. So that apathy and that kind of, let's move on, it's very, very problematic. I want us to engage with Afghanistan, with Afghans. Whatever decision we make will have consequences, not only for the Taliban, but consequences for the country as a whole. Yep. There are 35 million people. We should not forget them. In the 90s, when they were in power, they were isolated. And they were quite happy about it because they were blaming everything on the West. So now we should not give them the chance to blame things on the West, and we should make them accountable for their promises and commitments through international mechanisms, through the UN, through the EU. And we need to work more together, not as a single countries.
So what I wanted to do now was, we spoke about what England or the UK should do going forward. But what I want to speak about is how you feel about what the UK has done since the Taliban has got control of Afghanistan. Dominic Raab, Foreign Secretary, has been on holiday, not confirming where he was, what he was doing, specific dates. He can't even tell you how many people are currently in Afghanistan that have a right to come to the country based on international law. He has had lots of criticism. He's been asked to resign. How do you feel? Are you angry with the UK response so far? Are you content with the UK response so far?
I'm quite angry and upset what has been happening, not only in the last 2 weeks, but in the last 20 years. The UK has not paying much attention. The reason we are in this mess is because there were a lot of opportunities early on in 2001 and 2003. The Taliban were willing to surrender. There could have been a peace deal. There could have been an agreement. The US and the UK kind of refused then. And recently, Afghans are being betrayed. Afghans are being left alone to the wolves. because the US signed an agreement with the Taliban and giving them, legitimacy and empowerments, and that's how the Afghan army, in the political situation, they lost the morale because the US was falling out. I mean, I'm not in favor of US staying in Afghanistan, but in the last 5 years, they were just there providing assistance, advice, and a lot of support, air support to the Afghan troops. That's another story. But recently, the UK Prime Minister and the government has been very inactive. They were not very engaging with the Afghan government and what's happening on the ground. And we took 15,000 people, evacuated 15,000 people, about 5,000 British nationals and 10,000 vulnerable Afghans or Afghans who work with us. That's good. But there was such a chaotic scenes at Kabul airport. Things were done with very little planning. It was done there was a lot of indignity. So I am angry with our politicians. I think we need to hold them to account. We need to write to our MPs to do more on Afghans in Afghanistan. There are things that we could do right away. I don't know what the government is waiting for. There are 3,000 Afghan asylum seekers in the system. Right now, the Home Office has not made a decision on their claims. The UK has constantly been deporting Afghans, sent 15,000 in the last 10 years, arguing that Afghanistan is safe. There are thousands of others who are undocumented, who are failed asylum seekers because of the argument that Kabul or certain parts of Afghanistan were safe. So I want the government to actually grant these Afghans amnesty and grant them refugee status, grant them humanitarian protection, so they could have certainty and stability. They can't be deported. They can't go back to a place where, I mean, it was already insecure before. It was one of the most insecure countries. Now it's completely out of control in that sense. So there are things we could do. And also I want the UK government to do more on the front of aid and support to these people who need humanitarian assistance.
With Dominic Raab, I think there were certain reports that he wasn't even aware of. There was the British intelligence telling him that they thought that Afghanistan would hold back the Taliban takeover until the end of the calendar year. That's proved to be incorrect. It seems like the UK, on a political basis, have underperformed, and there's a lot of questions to be answered. But what they're not doing, what can we do as citizens here to fill the gaps? You've mentioned certain things that you want to see. What can we do, people watching this video, to apply that pressure to make the politicians who are failing right now do better and hold them accountable?
In the last 2 weeks, it's been very warming to receive hundreds of messages of support and solidarity. As an Afghan, people are saying they're thinking of me and my family, which is wonderful. And a lot of British people have actually signed up to, there's a room for refugees and refugees are home. 2,000 people in 10 days. They want to host refugees, which is great because we have this 10,000 Afghans. They need a place to be accommodated somewhere. A lot of people have been donating to Care for Calais, a charity supporting Afghans in hotels, the Refugee Council, Refugee Action, other local Afghan charities, Paiwan, the Afghan associations of Afghanistan, and other charities helping Afghans. So I want people to continue donating clothes and other basic necessities, money. This is great, and to support Afghans' voices. We need to write to our MPs. We need to send petitions. We need to go on demonstration when there is one. I think we should all care. We should all be concerned for our fellow human beings who are suffering. And not only do we have a moral responsibility to welcome Afghans, or also legal obligation, but we owe it to the Afghans, particularly because of our role in our military intervention and our 20 years of engagement in Afghanistan. And what is happening right now, these Afghans are leaving because of our actions or inactions. If Britain and America played it differently, if things were done differently, then these Afghans will not be fleeing for their lives. And we are losing, Afghanistan is losing its brain. Literally, these young people, these people were the ones running the government, running the country. And now we literally have no government, and things are terrible.
What I'll try and do at least is, hopefully this video is one of those avenues. It gives you a voice as an Afghan yourself, proper representation, talk about issues facing your country. We'll also make sure that the links below, the links that you've mentioned, to some of these organisations are below, so people can click on them and add to these petitions, add to this pressure.
And of course, I like people to read my book as well if they want to understand more about why do Afghans flee, what happens. There's a lot about the Taliban, my experience of growing up as a child, the journey itself, why do people come to the UK, and what happens when they come here. So I would appreciate if people could read The Lightless Sky.
Can I just have a look at that book? I just want to show this. So this tells the incredible story of your journey, I imagine.
Yes, indeed.
Cool. So there's the book, The Lightless Sky. Now, one thing that I want to talk to you about, and I have to do this as someone of Pakistani heritage myself, what is the role of Pakistan in all of this? And I know we can go really, really deep into this one, but if we just try and keep this, in the interest of time, high level, because what I don't want to do as a Pakistani to be disingenuous and not give you the opportunity to speak freely about the part that my country might have played in all of this.
So basically, the Taliban would not have been able to do what they have done without the help and support, safe sanctuaries, training Pakistan, particularly the Pakistani military and the intelligence services. It's open secret. The US, the international community knows this. The British government knows this. Pakistan is an ally. It's been playing a double game. I mean, I have a lot of love, respect for the Pakistani people, but the government has been responsible for the suffering of Afghan people. And, when people ask me about Pakistan, I say to them, look, I feel like an oppressed Palestinian, and Pakistan is my Israel. And some people find that quite controversial and difficult, but I want Pakistanis to question their governments and question their actions and support. Like a lot of people you see on social media from Pakistan are supporting the Taliban. Would they want to live under their government? There's a Pakistani Taliban, and you should allow them to govern. Pakistan see the Taliban as an asset, as a proxy force, and they see this because the Afghan government was very friendly to India. There's geopolitics involved. There's reasons around water. We don't recognize the border. There's a lot of conflicts issues here. Pakistan doesn't want to see stable and strong Afghanistan because it will undermine Pakistan and also their relations with India. So we've this Afghanistan has been a place between great empires. So between Chinese, between Russians, America, the British. The British and the Russians use Afghanistan as a buffer zone. Because so we've always been in this great game. But I request my Pakistani brothers and sisters to please, question their politicians and their media and their military intentions and their actions. The Taliban have been fighting for the last 20 years. As I said, 150,000 Afghans lost their lives. Pakistan have bloods on its hand.
I think it's very, very interesting and potentially jarring for Pakistanis. Even though I'm a British-born Pakistani, Pakistanis living and born in Pakistan, or even people like myself, because as Pakistanis, we don't get told this. We don't, my experience, the Pakistanis I know, their experience is that we don't understand the history and some of the things that Pakistan have done or are doing that aren't necessarily positive.
Exactly.
So I guess from my point of view, this whole thing that's going on in Afghanistan has made me look at Pakistan's involvement a little bit and question things a bit more. It's very hard to understand what to believe and what not to believe, but I would urge all of my Pakistani brothers and sisters to go and do that research, try and go on a fact-finding mission.
Hundreds of articles and videos. I mean, people say, look, we have been ungrateful and we being namak haram for not appreciating Pakistan giving refuge to Afghans. These Afghans will not be refugees if it wasn't for Pakistan's support for the Mujahideen.
Namak haram, translate that for
that
the
means
audience.
That because Pakistan has given us namak means salt, they give us bread and food and hosted us, and we're being ungrateful to them. But that's not the fact.
So almost like traitors.
Exactly, which we are not. Yeah. They're blaming Afghan refugees for terrorism in Pakistan. They blame us for all sorts of issues. Gives very few rights to Afghan refugees when it comes to citizenship rights, works and employment and education. And people keep bringing this up, but the reality is Afghans would not be refugees if it wasn't for Pakistan's actions in support for these militant and insurgent groups.
I think the important thing here is that we need to keep an objective mind. You used a very jarring analogy, something I find very hard to digest when you mention that as an Afghan, you feel like a Palestinian at the hands of Israel, and Pakistan is your Israel. That's anyone that knows me knows how jarring that statement will be to me. But I think it's very important that we are open-minded and we go and do some research and try and find out, because when we look at the situation in Palestine, we obviously implore those Israelis to hold their government to account. So surely that same burden exists with us Pakistanis to speak out against our own government.
That's a great point. We shouldn't be hypocritical. We should, if you want freedom and justice and self-determination for Kashmir, we should also care about what's happening to the Pashtuns in Pakistan, what's happening to the Baloch, what's happening in Afghanistan. There's a Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, the PTM movement. They've been criticized as traitors, as people who supported by NDS or by India, by RO. These are people asking for their rights. They want landmines removed. They want a truth commission to find out about their loved ones who have been disappeared by Pakistani army. They want the Pakistani army checkpoints to disappear. Like these things, people doesn't want to know. They hold jalsas and gathering. 100,000 people join them. The Pakistani media don't report on it. So these are things we should inform ourselves of and be, as I said, be objective. We're all human beings. We should care about and be concerned for other human beings, particularly our fellow Muslim brothers and sisters.
I think a few of the things you've just mentioned in that sentence, I need to go and do my research on, because I don't even have the slightest idea about some of these things. And hopefully other people will watch this video and do the same thing. Oops. What I would say, though, is that this is primarily a football channel. People watch this channel to listen to football talk. So the one thing that I would say is that no one in the world cares more about consistency than football fans. Trust me, it's all we ever talk about, and especially Arsenal fans, all we ever want is consistency, where there's no more important field to be consistent in than when it comes to these moral issues. So hopefully, this can give us that opportunity to look into a bit more of an education, introspection, and that sort of thing, and get up to speed. Before we wrap up this video, what I want you to do is this journey that we didn't really focus on for when you were 12 years old, doing this you know, a 12-month journey, getting arrested in multiple countries. Can you share with us one anecdote, one memory that really, really sticks with you from that journey, which is a year in your life that so many people will never experience anything remotely like it? Give us one story from that experience.
There are many stories, but one of the stories that stays with me and it keeps me awake at night is I was in a boat from Turkey to Greece, designed for 20 to 30 people. There were 120 of us in it. We were in the sea for about 3 days and 3 nights, 48 hours or so. No food, no water. We couldn't go to the toilet, and our boat was broken down and was about to be capsized. And it just, for me, just a story, but actually I saw death with my own eyes. Within minutes, if the Greek Coast Guard had not came in to rescue us, we would have drowned. Our boat would have capsized. And I've seen stories of other refugees and other asylum seekers and migrants been drowning in the Mediterranean. There's been 25 to 30,000 people in the last 5 years. It breaks my heart, and that's why I do what I do, advocating and campaigning for refugees' rights. And I've seen videos of the same Greek Coast Guard who saved me now purposely drowning people, pushing them because of politics, because of lack of humanitarian values. So, you know, that's one story that stays with me. And every time I see news of people drowning, I'm really afraid of the sea. I mean, the sea is beautiful. I was recently in Dover doing a BBC interview, and I was near the sea. It was beautiful, but I wouldn't want to go in the sea, because that more than 13 years ago, almost 14 years, I was in that situation. And I just hope people doesn't have to go through what I went through. And for me, it's not about what happened to me, but it's what's happening to people. There are people still stranded in Calais. There are people still stranded on the border of Bosnia and Serbia and Greece. People are living in terrible, inhumane conditions in the Greek islands. Turkey has built a wall with Iran, doesn't want Afghans to come to Turkey. Iran has closed its border with Afghanistan. Greece has built a wall with Turkey. It's just like everyone wants to wash their hands of responsibility of dealing with this humanitarian crisis. In Afghans, you know, there's always been lack of solidarity with Afghans, which kind of makes me sad. I have been campaigning for all refugees, but particularly for Afghans. So I hope, you know, people watching, you know, please be concerned, care about this, and support refugees, support people in any way you can. I think we all have it within ourselves. We are capable of showing humanity, and we can make a difference. We could have an impact. You know, every little helps.
Gulwali, thank you so much for sharing your stories, your opinions, and taking out your time today. And look, from me personally, as a human being, I wish the human beings in Afghanistan who have now been evacuated from Afghanistan, anyone linked to Afghanistan, I wish them all the best, and I wish them prosperity and hopefully an easier life than what it looks like will happen at this stage.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.